Welcome to the Inside the Middle East question and answer series at the Middle East Initiative. My name is Anna Boots, and I'm a master's candidate at the Center for Middle Eastern Studies at Harvard University, and editor-in-chief of the Harvard Journal for Middle Eastern Politics and Policy. Today we are joined by Hisham Alawi, a visiting fellow at the Weatherhead Center for International Affairs at Harvard University and a DPhil candidate in Oriental Studies at St. Anthony's College at Oxford University. Mr. Alawi, welcome to the program and thank you for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me.
To begin, could you please describe your present relationship to the Moroccan monarchy and how that relates to what happened to you in Tunis this fall?
Well, very briefly, I have not seen His Majesty King Mohammed VI, or have seen him only 3 times in the past 20 years in very public but congenial circumstances. I have left the royal palace at his request. I am a free spirit and I like to keep my independence. You will read sometimes here and there that I am fourth in line to the throne of Morocco. I can assure you this is no longer the case. I have no institutional tie to the monarchy. Having said that, the monarchy is a central institution in our country, and I do not write very often about Morocco, but when I do, I do have to evoke the monarchy and express my opinions on this subject. Furthermore, what happened in Tunisia, not necessarily linked to Morocco, although it may be intimately linked, but again, it may not be necessarily linked. I say that because we still do not know what is the identity of this third party that leaned so heavily and that exercised so much pressure on the Tunisian government and the presidency to deport me from Tunisia. The Tunisian presidency says that this was an administrative decision, but I can assure you it wasn't. It was a presidential decision, if not taken directly, at least, the very least, cleared by the president of Tunisia, but we have yet to know the details, who exercised that pressure. I cannot speculate. All I can say is this: the Moroccan government did not protest, did not seek explanations, and did not even issue an official position. Finally, just to clarify my situation, I am like 5.6 million Moroccans living in another country, and I call another country home. For me, my home, my adopted country, is the United States, and this year I'm at Harvard, and it is a very enjoyable and very rich and stimulating experience.
6 years out from the Arab Spring, what do you consider to be the major forces shaping the Middle East and North Africa today?
I think there is a consensus now that the Arab Spring, at least its first phase, imploded, and that the result is failed states, counter-revolution, restoration of authoritarianism, except for maybe the Tunisian experience that has crossed the threshold of electoral democracy. Of course, this is still one phase of the Arab Spring. I believe other phases will come. My sense is that the feature that characterizes this present period is the massive intervention of geopolitics and especially counter-revolutionary forces. Let me explain. After the political breakthroughs, conservative regimes have reorganized and have asserted themselves in the region. They have begun timidly in the beginning, but this accelerated, and along with the sectarian or confessional confrontation as represented by the Shiite-Sunni divide, these two phenomena have conjoined or have morphed in one, i.e., or namely, the confessional revolution, or the confessional confrontation and the counter-revolution. And today, this is in full gear. We see these counter-revolutionary movements or impulses being manifested not only in the Egyptian coups, but also in the sporadic interventions in Libya, in the war in Yemen, of course, in the Syrian theater. This is creating a lot of havoc. It's creating a lot of violence. It's creating a lot of disruption and centrifugal forces. But I think this counter-revolution has failed in that it is not presenting an alternative. And the only thing that it has going for itself right now is the fear of chaos, which many people feel. Many people want change, but the adventurism and the bad experiences that have happened in many places are dampening this process. At the same time, this counter-revolution going in full throttle has also pushed these regimes that are heading it, that are going ahead with it, has pushed them towards more coercion and more social control, and as a result, it is fragilizing or exposing many of these regimes in the long term. You add to this the fact that we are in the midst of what we can call a rentier decline in hydrocarbons. The revenue streams of hydrocarbons is for structural reasons on the decline, and as a result, this is exposing many of the countries that are leading this counter-revolutionary movement or spearheading this impulse, and it is exposing it. We have yet to see where it will stop, and regretfully, it may stop as a result of crises, as a result of defeats that can expose these regimes to very serious trouble.
So you mentioned Tunisia as the exception in the region. What is the current state of Tunisia's ongoing democratic transition following its revolution in 2011?
I think the Tunisian example is a bright spot, although we have to be prudent and cautious. It is an example of what we call pacted transitions, in which Islamists and secular groups have bargained for a successful transition, a successful beginning of institutionalization, but this has yet to consolidate. Since then, we have seen a return to the old practices, a return by the old symbols of the old regime that have come back to power from the back door, and the regime has yet to institutionalize this pact between the Islamists and the secularists is in a sense frozen. And it's something that we see very often in pacted transitions. The challenge is moving beyond that. We're seeing trouble with the effort to conduct, or at least, introduce principles of transitional justice in the system. We've seen a lot of resistance from the old guard, who have basically hijacked the project. But at the same time, we see a lot of mobilization and vitality in civil society and many of these organizations, which has pushed forth the transition. So it's a mixed picture, and the last chapter has yet to be written.
And one of the many challenges facing Tunisia right now as the Syrian war draws to a close is the return of fighters from Syria to Tunisia. How do you think that a new democracy like Tunisia should deal with this challenge of the returning fighters? And how is that testing their democracy right now?
I think this will be an enormous strain on the transition and on democratic institutions. And the key word here is rule of law. If rule of law is expected in dealing with the return of these jihadis, that is a framework of narrow cooperation between the justice system and the security forces, by which the rights of everybody and due process is ensured, then Tunisia will have navigated this minefield successfully. But the fear is, of course, that the impulse for protecting society and at the same time for bringing in the old practices back, that this creates a situation in which security forces resort immediately to torture and social and coercion and repression as a means not only to defend society against terrorism, but more so perversely to protect the old quarters and the old sectors of the old regime, which have come back into the economic and political spheres.
And when thinking about all of these challenges facing the region, what do you consider to be the important factors that distinguish North Africa as a region distinct from the Middle East more broadly?
Well, I think we've talked already about Tunisia. Algeria and Morocco have not known this electoral democracy, this transition yet, but they are better positioned because they're in the Maghreb than the countries in the Mashreq. For one, these countries or this zone is far away from the confessional divide, which I just talked about, and they're far away from the revolutionary or counter-revolutionary forces. And in the case of Morocco, Morocco has the blessing of not being exposed to the negative aspects that one encounters with hydrocarbon rents. So you have these factors, plus the fact that Morocco and Algeria, and especially Morocco, have a history of pluralism, curtailed, truncated, sometimes hollow, but a pluralism that within its contours nonetheless exists, a culture, a political culture of bargaining, of electoral accountability, the forms of democracy, even the routines of democracy, even if they are shallow. But still, that is very important. Also, you have a civil society that is vibrant and that is there and that is playing an important role in diffusing norms and political and the democratic political culture. So if or when democratization comes in Morocco and Algeria, I'm not saying that the regimes will initiate it, but I'm saying that this will be an unintended consequences as a result of the unsustainability of the status quo because of the socioeconomic problems. And if and when that happens, I think these countries will be better equipped to embark on such a path, although it will be very difficult, and I think it'll be drawn out for some time.
So in light of that, what do you make of the protests that have been underway in the Rif region of northern Morocco for over a year now? What do you think that the real root causes are? And as a follow-up, perhaps, what do you see? Do you see any real hope for a change in the balance of power in Morocco in the near future?
Well, again, the Moroccan regime or political system's priority today is not democracy, and has never been democracy. The regime's priority was always survival. And sometimes it meant adapting to challenges, and it meant sometimes assuming the trappings and the facade of democracy, but rarely the substance of democracy. So that's an important distinction to keep in mind. But as it adapts, sometimes where it has adapted, it has created spaces in which there can be some maneuvering and some actions by the democratic forces. Before I come to the Rif, I think the problematique of the monarchy has been overly studied, and we know the tools that the monarchy has: economic power, the security apparatus, cultural persuasion, geopolitical influences by friends like France, Spain, the United States. We all know that. But what's understudied also is the opposition. Why hasn't the opposition, given this more, I wouldn't say liberal, but more open framework in Morocco, why haven't they been able to mount a real challenge to the status quo? And why haven't they been organized to to provoke a breakthrough and to exploit the spaces that are out there. And that it's not a mystery, but it's out there, and it's something that we ought to be able to focus more than the monarchy. Now, coming to the reef issue, the reef is an old, new problem. It is old because in the 60s and 70s, the Moroccan monarchy has deliberately marginalized the reef because it was restless, because it was in a state of dissidence. And there has been much marginalization and much violence. In the last 15 years, the Moroccan state has tried to reverse that by putting in a lot of investments in the north, by engaging many citizens in the north. But regretfully, this has taken place in an ad hoc and discretionary ways, and it has suffered from a lack of an institutional approach. And hence, they were not able to overcome these problems. And what needed is a new approach that would be institutional and that would be based on the role of citizenships and not only of patronage. Now, regretfully, it is going to be very difficult, even with goodwill, to reverse the situation in the reef. It'll take a long time before we ameliorate things. So what is the solution? The good news is that no matter how elusive this solution is, the good news is that with all its faults, there is still dialogue. It's tense, but there's still dialogue between the central state and the Reefin movement. And the Reefin movement, for very specific reasons, is not gonna be pacified so easily, because marginalization has led to immigration, and as a result, there's a diaspora outside that is supporting the reef. It has been marginalized, and it has entered into narcotics and smuggling. There are many networks of smuggling and narcotics in the reef, precisely because there was a need to let off some steam, if you will. But the result has been that there have been many networks constituted that are autonomous and that are not vulnerable or exposed to state control. So this movement is not going to go away. It's going to stay. The real test is to see whether this problem or this problematique will be replicated elsewhere, will migrate elsewhere to other regions or not. And that has yet to be seen. So this is an old problem in its new manifestation, and it's happening in a broader framework of democratic deficit, in which we see that clearly the status quo is unsustainable, but it's very hard to say what will break that impasse, what other movements will emerge, what will change that present topography.
Thank you so much for joining us, Mr.
Thank
Alawi.
you very much for inviting me. Thank you.